Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle MacDonald, a project leader at BCG's CEO advisory practice, who in a prior life has spent 10 years in the fascinating world of family offices. But today, I'm your host for the Simple webinar on family office software and technology, a topic that all of us are incredibly excited to unpack with you. To those joining for the first time, Simple powers the next generation of family offices through end-to-end products and services that make the family office journey straightforward. To access actionable insights and solutions from today's webinar, you can access Simple's 5th annual Family Office Software and Technology Report by heading over to www.andsimple.co. Joining me today on the panel, we have Francois Boerter. So Francois is the founder and CEO of Simple, a next generation platform that helps family offices and private investors to professionalize and be future ready. With over 20 years of experience in the technology, strategy, and private wealth space, he is a strategic discussion partner to family office leaders, affluent families, and businesses around the globe. He writes for Forbes.com on family office leadership and strategy, sharing his insights and perspectives on topics that matter to the next generation of wealth owners. Good to have you, Francois. Next up is Martin Stadler. So Martin is an accomplished wealth management expert with extensive experience and a solid network in the ultra high net worth and family office space, working with family offices from a variety of viewpoints. He has been actively exposed to key challenges in the industry over the past decade, from the organizational and technical transformation of family offices to the needs and expectations of the next generation, and the way an ultra high net worth family works with the various service providers in the financial industry for their specific needs. Great to have you as well. And then Mark Tipshis. So Mark is the family office design and governance strategist for UBS Family Office Solutions and a registered representative with UBS Financial Services, Inc., a subsidiary of the UBS Group AG. At UBS, he regularly advises family offices across the Americas and globally. Mark has 15 years of dedicated expertise in the family office space and has helped numerous families establish and evolve their family offices and governance practices. He spent a decade as a general counsel inside a large single family office, so is very well placed to empathize on some of the experiences that many of you would have had today. So very much looking forward to a juicy conversation around sort of technology and the digital solutions that we find in this space. So really, let's sort of start with, where are we at? Where there's sort of this big portion of family offices that have not digitized yet. Whether that's just them sort of struggling to resist sticking to Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. Why is this, Francois?
Kyle, yeah, great to kick this off today. I think we've been running this technology review piece for more than 5 years now. So, and when we started this, we really started it from the base that it's difficult to find a good fit between a technology vendor and a family office, partly due to the many different types of family offices out there. There's hyper-fragmented industry and a lot of opacity in the industry as well. But I think that hasn't really become much easier, I think, over the last couple of years. I think a lot of times it's just because family office professionals that need to select these solutions, it's really difficult for them to find the right solution because they've never had to do this before. So that's kind of one of the reasons. I think it's becoming easier, definitely. We're not the only ones that track the space in terms of digitalization. There's also players like Camden Wealth, large research firms that have done this for many years, and they're estimating that the digitalization in the space is only about 25%, like beyond just Excel and email. So I think that there's still a big gap in terms of digitalization. I think there's a big question also on whether everyone needs to go beyond Excel, and I think that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, that's at least from my perspective.
And maybe a bit of a question, Martin. Are you beginning to see this change with next gen? So as you begin to see this generational shift in wealth happening, is there an increased appetite to adopt digital solutions?
I would say definitely. I mean, if we look at the typical patriarch, let's say maybe going to his 70s and having another approach of dealing with his total wealth and his service provider, he's maybe not that much into transparency, and the PDF report once a month has perfectly fulfilled his need. Whereas if you see then family members, the younger ones coming in and taking over responsibility, they're used to having access day by day, all kind of information. So therefore, having software in place which helps them to be better informed, to take better decision, is just a natural step. But I would say it's not only the generational shift within a family that leads here to more usage of tools. It's as well a shift in generation within the family office employees. In most of the cases, the senior private banker, maybe close to his retirement, was there during the liquidity event. So he became the trusted partner building up the family office. And usually this kind of personnel hasn't had a high affinity to technology at that time. And maybe as well, the way they handle families' wealth is more, okay, I'm there, I'm responsible for everything. I try to keep as well my position. And as we all know, as soon as you have a software, a family is better involved. You have much more transparency, what's going in the right direction or wrong direction. So I would say the old generation of family officer has handled the way of aggregating and sharing data in a different way. Whereas if we see now, let's say 40, 45 years old family officer coming in, maybe from the consultancy industry, he's used to that, having supportive tools and using it in a daily business in an intelligent way. So I think these are the two generational shifts that we will see. And I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to be a big push in the software industry. So we will see, hopefully as well, this pie chart, how many are using Excel, tilting towards the other direction.
Right. And maybe whether, Francois, you might actually be better placed to sort of answer this one, but do you see a big difference in the sort of professionalization and the appetite for these digital tools with, say, single family offices versus multi-family offices, and this sort of move towards professionalization, or even by different region, right?
For sure. I think if we look at single versus multifamily offices, and that's kind of broadly putting everyone into these two buckets, but I guess the needs are very different. So from the single family office side, the need for technology might once again be more around reporting, around managing the operations. I think lots of operating costs are increasing, especially from a people perspective. So being able to gain efficiencies there is definitely helpful on a single family office setup. From a multi-family office perspective, it's about scaling often. So it's about a different set of tools that enables that, and being able to, again, provide these services more cost effectively through the use of technology. And I think so there's different needs and different tools to consider in those two areas. But both sides, I think, like Martin said, is really driven by this shift in mindset. Many entrepreneurs are coming from tech companies now, seeing liquidity events. The expectations for technology is much different to the previous generation as well.
Right. And Mark, family offices are really unique environments. Is there really a use case for introducing new tools? Or is this something that vendors are just sort of, pushing because it's good, it's shiny, and there's a value proposition to potentially move?
No, I mean, it's a real thing. I mean, you hit the nail on the head earlier where, I kind of analogize a family office to an island. So you're running, 30 different businesses, accounting, budgeting and forecasting, investing, legal, tax, and any number of activities that a family has going on inside the family office. And you're doing it with, 8 to 10 people on average. And so, to be more efficient and to scale and to automate some of these activities, specifically around the accounting side and the data aggregation, right? So like Addepar, for instance, and as well as the accounting and budgeting and forecasting, can really help bring a lot of efficiency to the family office operating environment. So you're seeing it. I mean, it is real, but it is a slow process for a number of different reasons, mainly because you're dealing with a 10-person firm, right? A family office. And so they're like, how is this going to disrupt me? Do we have the bandwidth to find a solution, implement it on board, as well as operate it? And how is that going to change us? So it's there, it's real, but it is, you're dealing with for the most part, 10-person firms with these family offices. So,
right. And I guess, how does the technology, or what is the promise that it can sort of deliver? Is it that you're sort of seeing these solutions really promising to move the dial quite significantly in terms of driving increased sort of return on investment? Is it increasing sort of efficiency? What are the biggest sort of use cases that potentially you're seeing?
I think it's all of the above. So in a family office environment, right, it's a very complex environment, which is often the reason why a family starts a family office. So I would say a family office is the result of it's really a market failure from external firms that can do it all under one roof for the most part. And so you're trying to make an informed decision. And if it takes you 2 weeks to make that informed decision because you're cobbling it all together on an Excel spreadsheet, right, rather than having a firm like Addepar, right, give you that holistic view with daily feeds, and it can cut through, slice and dice through entities, then it's going to make your family office platform, much more efficient, and to allow you as a family office executive to make more informed and better decisions for the family, which could be investment allocation, it could be budgeting and forecasting. So, it is about efficiency.
Yeah. Great. And maybe, Francois, again, a question for you. So if I'm a family office and I'm thinking about some of the typical sort of software and technology that I could begin to consider to adopt as part of my tech stack, if you will, what are some of the typical sort of archetype technologies that we're seeing increasingly being adopted?
Yeah, for sure, Carl. I think, again, the work we're doing at Simple, we kind of look at family offices almost like startups rather than institutional investors if we think about their needs. So because most of the family offices that we often meet would be either at that starting point or at this inflection point where they need to digitize or change their tech stack. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's really kind of the basics. What technology stack do we run on? Where do we store our data? Who do we hire? It's the people, process, technology, culture piece, right? So you're shaping that culture, and you can start from any of these kind of starting points. So with that said, I think it's the basics. So when we look at the different technology solutions, it could be it's normally a problem that we start this conversation with. So it could be around, we're looking at aggregating different sources. We actually more actively managing certain investments, and that's kind of the management state. Or we need to be reporting. So depending on what the primary need is, it could really span across those three sections. And it's often kind of some considerations around data, some considerations around reporting that comes into play, and the different users that would be actually using that. So whether it is mainly kind of the professional management, whether there's kind of an owner involved, those would all influence what solutions you could be looking at.
Right. That makes complete sense. So I guess we have a question in the chat, which maybe circles back to something we said earlier, which is are the challenges and issues faced by single family offices and multi-family offices the same? Now, I can probably say that quite adamantly, yes and no. These are very different organizations. One is a lot more sort of multi-stakeholder driven. I'm not saying that a single family office isn't, but I think putting a sort of a tech and software lens, again, is this something that you would say the use case is the same, or are they vastly different? Maybe again a question for you, Francois.
I think, again, there's an interesting shift that we're seeing at the moment, and we're still waiting to see how it plays out, because a lot of these, I think traditionally, if we think about a multifamily office, the idea is that it's this commercial organization and it's a large commercial first organization. We've seen different versions of that multifamily office coming online in the last couple of years. So it could be shared services, it could be something around a private multifamily office just with a couple of, a closed group of families that's sharing this multifamily office. And then single family offices shifting to become multifamily offices as well. So that's another interesting shift that we're seeing. So the question really, if we look at, are the challenges the same? I think depends on where they're at in that journey. So it could be that it's a single family office today, but they might view different legs of the families as, different families in the future. So that could, bring those two need sets of a single family office versus a multi-family office closer together. But yeah, I guess they are definitely different from my perspective, different challenges. I don't know what maybe Martin or Mark has some other insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, the multifamily office is, let's say, usually commercially driven, as you mentioned already. So therefore, the technology is usually a big part of the value proposition. How do you want to position yourself as a multifamily office towards potential clients? And if you have a sexy tool, a sexy app that you can use, of course, you can reach the younger entrepreneur as a client easier than doing the traditional one-time private banking. So I think there it's really a strategic decision. We need this and this service, and we want to have it in a digital way. So we search for a tech vendor who can offer us this solution. Whereas on the single family office side, it's usually which problem do we want to solve in the current setup? Where do we want to get better for us as a family? And then the decision is not economically driven. So they will look for most of the time the Rolls-Royce solution, the best solution to really cope with the current situation. So the software project itself, if I may call it like this, is driven from different aspects. But nonetheless, it starts for both sides with a clear, I would say, having a workshop or a roadmap. What are really the needs that we want to fulfill with the software project? Because normally you're talking about $50,000 and above. And this is an investment which has to be really well balanced, that it's going to succeed as well.
Yeah. And I guess there's that inflection point for a lot of single family offices that begin to open up to multifamily. Can they take the same operating team, drive efficiencies, and sort of reach scale with adopting digital solutions to sort of increase their ability to service? I guess there's that option as well. But let's talk a little bit about data. So obviously, we live in a data-driven world. These models that we sort of see in the sort of large language models out in the world, they all sort of require data. Data privacy, data security, all sort of key topics. What does data really mean for family offices, and why is it important? So maybe a question. I'll start with you, Mark, and feel free.
Yeah, sure.
The others to join in.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. So great question. Data for family offices specifically is, it's not very provocative. It's usually centered around the accounting transaction data, right? For one. The other side of it, which is interrelated, which is, the investment portfolio data and allocations and the ability to cut through that complexity. So if I don't want to use the word typical family office, but a lot of family offices will have, dozens of trusts, and they'll combine those to achieve scale, right? And invest as a single partnership. So the issue becomes cutting through the transparency of those and understanding what's being held, right? Where. So like, are we holding Apple in this partnership? If so, what does the allocation look like for each of those underlying trusts across all partnerships? So that becomes, that's one of those things that Addepar and in systems like Addepar can solve for. And so for me, the data becomes allocation data. And then on the other side is accounting data, which is cash flow, budgeting and forecasting.
Great. And I guess if we think a little bit more about family offices trying to become data driven, and this is obviously something, we've covered in the past, Francois, but how can, if you're thinking about that generational shift, again, how can family offices begin to kind of aggregate that data and move towards sort of managing and effectively sort of trying to glean insights from that data today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data and knowledge piece goes kind of hand in hand. And I think this is where also you're hinting at in terms of data and AI, Kyle. I think there's an interesting part where we're thinking about like how the data that Mark just explained around investment data and accounting data, how does that mix with kind of our knowledge within the family office and kind of our view of the world and how our investment thesis comes together, and data around the family, that's another aspect that could potentially play into this. And it's the role of the people that up until now to make sense of all of this holistically almost. And I think the promise of AI is really that agents and kind of AI tooling would be making sense of that data and knowledge and people all at once to provide kind of insights. And I think this is kind of the question, is like, what do we need to do today to prepare and kind of protect the data in the right way to be able to use these types of tools in the future? And I think that's kind of a topic that I've heard quite a bit from family office professionals, just thinking about that data aspect. There's kind of unique intricacies in terms of like data security here. Where do you store it? How do you provide access to that? And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding what that means. And I think, again, different regions have different kind of legislation around this again, and different views on data. Again, I know the Swiss, Martin, you guys have a very specific view on data there.
I grew up 20 years with Swiss banking secrecy, so let's say we have a special education on that one. But in the context of wealthy families and their data, I mean, at the end of the day, their privacy, and with that, their data is the biggest asset they have. If you have 100 million on a bank account, okay, nice, but you want to protect your privacy. With all kind of bankable and non-bankable assets that you have or you build up, of course, you're dealing with more and more service providers, and somehow keep the data together and share the data only on a need-to-know basis is something very crucial. And besides just, let's say, having numbers and documents, it's as well the soft data, which is important for a family, especially in the transition of generation. So let's say, what if the 60-year-old wealth owner passes away tomorrow without having properly documented all of his direct investments that he has done? Or let's say, the most obvious case, he has started with crypto, but nobody knows the password and the backup keys, etc., etc. So therefore, this is as well a trigger in the discussion with families nowadays that using a software to aggregate but as well standardize data is a very important pillar for such a decision. And you can see it a little bit like an investment software or family software is like a CRM for your total wealth. So if you have done a private equity direct investment, you have there all the related documents, you have the telephone number, you have all the, let's say, in between lines negotiated topics for the future. And that's super precious to know and to share and to keep in a safe place for the next generation.
All right. And I guess thinking a little bit more about some of the other sort of key, unique sort of data pieces that a family office would want to leverage to sort of generate insight in the future. Mark, are there any that come to mind for you? And again, realize this is a bit of a out of field, left field question.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I've been getting a lot of questions from family office heads, family office executives on, hey, where's AI at for family offices at this point? They're really looking at it for, all the information I said a few minutes ago, but part of it, they're also looking for it to solve some pain points. And what are these pain points when it comes to family office tech? The family office tech is situated in fragmented silos, right? So you've got a bunch of different systems that don't really talk to each other, right? That being consolidated reporting, the accounting. I think it's getting better, but it's not there yet. And then you've got all this like qualitative softer data, and they're looking for it. And I don't know if this is answering your question. They're looking for AI to like link all these together so they don't have to cobble it together on an Excel spreadsheet, even if they have these systems in place. And so that's kind of where I see where they're looking at it, looking at AI to kind of help solve for. I don't think, AI, in my opinion, is going to come through the wealth management channel first, rather than the quasi-institutional, which is the family office. So you'll start to see the larger kind of tech platforms out there that service not only wealth management, but also family office kind of adopt AI. And so it's going to be interesting to see how much more efficient family offices become over the next, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years.
Right. And maybe a bit of a follow-up question on that. So you mentioned, obviously, heads of family offices beginning to ask this question. The market is bubbly and exciting around this. beginning to understand what are my data challenges and opportunities, but then B, how can I begin to actually leverage that to drive efficiencies? Are you seeing a difference when it comes to the types of family offices that are asking for these things? Are these family offices that are quite mature in their data journey, or are they, quite nascent family offices that have just sort of started the process of becoming a family office? Where are you seeing demand?
Yeah, it's really the style and the preference of how they do things, right? So we have family offices that are pure allocators, might not necessarily care about leveraging all the data and the insights that can be gained by the data. And then where I think most of the family offices that are asking about this are coming from is they look like hedge funds, right? They may have been a hedge fund, return capital, or they may have a large liquid portfolio and they brought in a CIO type to do a slightly more active trading directly. That's where I see most family offices that are asking about this, right? It becomes the data for them because they're, it's them and like one or two or three analysts, and they're focused on, sourcing the best investment ideas, not necessarily trying to harvest all the data, but the data can certainly help them. So that's where I see it coming from is, depending on the style and preference, it's usually the ones that have a more active public investment side of the house. And then for those that are more actively engaged in privates, it becomes valuation data, right? It becomes what are our private assets valued at, and are we making the best decision in allocating to this fund or this direct investment? Because it's very opaque on the private side. So I see it coming from both the very public, very liquid side, and then I see it coming from, hey, we allocate a lot to privates, and like we're just kind of operating blindly. And certainly there's, firms like Preqin and stuff that they can get data from, but I think they could be doing a lot better with with AI and kind of leveraging across different platforms.
Right. And again, just to add to maybe what Mark's just saying there is, I think it's also about understanding where are we at in terms of AI. So I think right now we're seeing a lot of marketing speak around AI and around the kind of the promise of AI. Whereas if we've been monitoring it for a while, we realize that, OpenAI released their 5 levels of generative AI. So I think we're roughly at a level 3 type of thing. The way I look at it is that there's kind of 2 stages that we've been through, and we're kind of at the stage number 3 now. So where the first was really about being able to pool information. So like Mark said, it's like answering questions. Like, can I pull information from the data and the knowledge that we have stored? The next stage is almost about pushing again. So pushing kind of that insights proactively based on the data that I provide to a model. And then the third stage is actually the action stage. So if you're, for example, an active trader in this case, being able to either ask questions because you know what questions you need answered, or having a tool that can actually preempt what those questions would be and pushing that information to you based on what you look like. And then the third stage, being able to action on that as well. I think that's where we're at right now. Stage 1 and 2 pretty well operating, but stage 3 is this agentic promise. And I think that's kind of where a lot of very interesting things start to happen. But we're very early with that as well. So I think it comes back down to, I guess, how you structure and store that data and doing it in the right way. A lot of people that have played with kind of generative AI tools, use tools like ChatGPT, not knowing where you send that kind of data to, right? So there's no kind of constraints there. But what we've seen over the last years would be, or at least the last couple of months at least, that models, open source models like Llama's models that can be hosted, open source models that can be hosted on their own servers might be able to perform at a similar level to kind of the GPT model. So there's an interesting shift that's taking place that would, I think, enable a lot more family offices to safely and securely use these tools without risking not knowing which black box you send your data to.
So I was trying to
go ahead here from my side, the well-known or the family office view, and if I, let's say, see my day-to-day contacts to this group of people, I have to say as well, we are not there yet. yes, it's the flavor of the day, and we read daily in the newspaper about what all happens. But if you really talk about family office or wealth owner, they have not yet started in really using application, let's say, not more than 10% of it. And therefore, if I would be in the shoes of a family officer, I would start first with education. Educating family member, educating employees. What is it? How to use it securely? If we have these public language models, what kind of data are we sharing there? So I think it's a very important one. Second topic is investment. So put it on the to-do list for your next investment committee, because the grandchildren of the family will not like it in 30 years if you have missed the train of being invested in AI in general. And then only in the third one, thinking again, how can we use it in the daily business? And simple use cases, like if you have tomorrow with your banker a meeting about a specific investment topic. I remember my time being a private banker. I was always having much more information than the client. And this asymmetry has shifted now. So you can prepare for any meeting in a few seconds in a way that you're really at the same level like your providers of investment content. And I think there everybody shall use it already now as much as possible, and it's definitely easy to use. And only then it starts with using it operationally. And there I have to admit I'm a bit disappointed by the software industry. Francois has said it, many of them have it already in their marketing pitch. But if we talk about real AI, I don't see yet solutions out there which are really dealing in an interactive way with data to make the family office life or the investing process life in a better way. So I think there is still a long way to go, or in other words, there's a huge opportunity out there for the tech industry in the wealth management space, using the technology in an intelligent and secure way.
Yep. I had been trying to sort of resist the AI topic a little bit and push that back further in our conversation, but inevitably it was going to bubble to the front. I think a question that we have in the chat, and it's worth sort of calling out, is from Agron. So are family offices interested in utilizing AI for information management, such as information classification, CIA triad, preventative security, or is it more for investment purposes? So perhaps one for you, Francois, are you seeing there to be a bit more of a demand for AI to support not just from an investment perspective, but also from an information management perspective, as well as a security perspective?
Carl, I think, like Martin just said, I think the family office is kind of wear two hats when they're going into this topic of AI, understanding it as an emerging area to invest into, and then of course using potential of using the technology in the future. So I think that's kind of the first two hats that we're thinking about the investment perspective. I guess the other way to read this question is actually, to manage investments and using AI tooling for that. And I think, like Martin said as well, I don't think we're there yet. I think there's certain tools. I know some of the large custodians in the US have been launching some AI tooling. I don't know, Mark, if you've seen from a US perspective some things happening there. That's interesting adoption of technology there. But I guess US is a little bit more forward thinking in terms of like enabling regulatory environments and those kind of things in this topic. So yeah, Mark, I don't know, over to you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's going to come through the institutions first, right? Because they're going to have the scale to deploy it with all the data that they have. Specifically to that question, listen, you're dealing most of the time, family office executives, family office employees are accountants, investment folks, right? Tax folks by nature, by background. So they usually look to deploy it for those needs, right? That's kind of their hammer and their nail. And so that is where I see the questions being asked, where they're looking to deploy it at. And to a lesser extent, and I think it'll come, which is, the preventative security and data classification second, at least in my opinion. So from what I'm seeing.
Right. And where do you think that there might be a bit of a white space between kind of, classic wealth management and ultimately family offices? Where could there be solutions that could sort of come to market to sort of service that interface potentially, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, I'm looking, when I look at the space, you know, the kind of the wealth tech in general that's kind of deploying AI, they're looking to often solve like a very specific issue or problem. So it's very narrow, right? It's narrow and deep. So for instance, and this is where it will differ with family office deployment is, so on the RIA side, which, you know, we could call it MFO here in the States, registered investment advisor, you know, they're going out and trying to do some workflow stuff, meaning like automate, make workflow more efficient. So think subscription documents where they're trying to get 150 clients within a week or two on, you know, onboarded onto a certain, you know, alternative investment platform. Whereas the family office, that's not going to matter because they might only be signing the sub docs once or twice, right? Because they're entering that alternative investment with, you know, an investment partnership, which may have 50 partners or members in it. So I see it, I'm starting to see it on the alt side, but the MFO RIA, more commercially minded, is like trying to solve for one specific issue, narrow and deep, to just get that off of the RIA, you know, the analyst plate. And the family office is looking at it more broadly speaking, I think, which is like, we've got all this data and we're 10 people, and like, how do we leverage all this for the family office to make just better, more informed decisions? That's where I see it. That's where I see the distinction at this point.
Right. So I'm going to pedal back a bit from AI. I know it's tempting. I know it's the new shiny thing in the room. But let's, you know, basics again and speak a little bit about, you know, selecting technology. So today, you know, it's still surprisingly difficult for family offices to select the right type of technology. You know, how are CIOs, CEOs beginning to navigate the selection process? And what should the sort of selection process and criteria be? Maybe one for you, Francois.
I'll kick it off with something that I heard recently from a particular software vendor who said that their sales cycle, their longest sales cycle, was 23 years with bringing a client on board. So it's just like, if we're talking about long sales cycles, that's probably the longest I've heard of. But I guess the question is why. So there was a family office, there was somebody in the office that was handling kind of the portfolio, and that person had to retire first before they were open for new solutions. And I think this is kind of one type of family office where you're actually going through kind of an older organization that's digitizing and then, you know, having to bring on a new solution. Often they don't know where to start, like you say. So what does selection look like? I guess the first step is just trying to get the requirements down. So you want to try and narrow your search because there are so many solutions out there. Mark mentioned a couple earlier, but I think there's kind of the big brand names, and then there's various smaller solutions. And the question is like, what solution is the right fit for you? So it's really about starting with the different kind of aspects, the different users, trying to create a list of requirements. And then the process for this is really about, these are our requirements, rating those requirements, how important are those requirements for different stakeholders in this case, and then looking at a set of solutions that could potentially match those requirements. And the best way would be to take those requirements to those solutions or to those vendors and asking them for feedback on how they meet those requirements, really. And once you have that, you probably discover a couple of new requirements through the process based on those responses, taking another round before you're actually going into looking into specific solutions. That would make the process a lot smoother. So for anybody who hasn't done that before, it's kind of an RFI, RFP process, and it's just about request for information or request for proposals. That's really the core building block of selecting technology in the most efficient way, basically.
Right. And not a product placement, but if you are a family office and you are trying to find out what solutions are available in the market to you, where do you go?
Well, you can Google it.
Is it simple? Is that what you're trying to say? It's quite simple.
I think so. Our marketplace, I think, is a great space to compare different solutions. I think it is difficult to find. I mean, broadly, the term family office software could mean many different things. So you need to kind of get a little bit more like into the details. So what are you looking for? Are you looking for like investment focused software, reporting focused software, accounting products? Do you want everything in one product? Do you want separate solutions? There's lots of different approaches, so it's not as easy. But we don't have the magic solution, unfortunately, just yet. But yeah, we are definitely one of the places where you can find a set of solutions.
Perfect.
If I may add on here, I mean, at the end of the day, in most of the family office cases, a person gets the responsibility to make this vendor selection process without having worked with one of these softwares. So for me, it's a little bit like, okay, now I get $50,000 and I get the job building up a wine cellar, but I'm not a wine specialist. I have tasted a few wines, okay, that's fine, but how to make now the best investment for building up this cellar? So therefore, the same way, if you have as a family office project of selecting a software, I think it's really important that you try to access knowledge. So of course you can Google it and you might bump into Simple, but I think it's as well sharing best practice with other single family offices who are in the same position or who have done the process already, as well taking an external consultant, because usually if you do an RFP, the vendors are presenting to you, it's all shiny. They present you the Ferrari. And it's out of that, most of the time difficult, out of the last three, to say now which is the one on the top. But it's not only having that part, it's as well, okay, which vendor is good in helping you to implement? What kind of servicing model do you need, let's say, for data cleansing, etc., etc. So the broader you can elaborate on all aspects of the project with somebody who has seen that and done that, and the bigger is, of course, the likelihood that you succeed with the project in the respective budget that you have defined before.
Yeah, and I think
sorry, just to add to what Martin's saying, I think sharing knowledge with others that have gone through it, definitely useful. And if anybody's done an evaluation sheet, or several people in your network, like getting that information, I think that's part of the data that you need. I think it's important to also recognize where you might be different to the family office where you've received this information from, because what worked for them might not be the right solution for you. So just because you're friendly, you might be sharing deals, you might be sharing lots of kind of strategic conversations that's relevant on kind of people or those kind of aspects of the organization, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right fit in terms of technology. And I think that's really where it becomes really nuanced to kind of understand, the requirements. Like Martin said, many haven't had to do this before, so you need to kind of start from scratch. So you really need those inputs. But then B, what's being presented against those requirements, and asking the right questions to understand what's maybe not being shared, or what is that kind of one need that you're not really that aware of. So I think there's a big exploratory stage where definitely peer input becomes really relevant, but should be approached with caution.
Yeah, and that sort of leads quite nicely onto the question, which is, in this sort of selection process, before you sign on the dotted line, what are some of the sort of key risks or watch outs to consider in that process? And I think you raised that quite nicely. Family offices have unique and differing needs. Going through that vendor due diligence process is key. But are there other things that you see, either Martin or Mark, that sort of come to mind as potential sort of watch outs or things to consider in that selection process?
Yeah, I'll go first. Somebody said nice shiny objects. I think that's a good analogy, because in my role at UBS, I've got a lot of kind of new and or existing kind of tech platforms reaching out to me and say, hey, would you have a conversation with us? Do the demo. I'm like, this looks great, but I don't know what I should be even asking, because I'm not a tech person. I'm an attorney, which makes me even worse, right, than an accountant, because I don't even deal with data. And so what I do is I say, hey, give me a couple references. Let me talk to a few family offices that are operating it. And they're usually pretty good about that, right? I mean, I know they're probably going to be self-serving references, but at least I've got some comparisons to talk to. In the family office I've spoken to, so I've done this probably 8 or 9 times at this point. And the family offices I speak to are usually pretty transparent. They're like, yeah, this system works great, except for X, Y, and Z. And by the way, I know that any tech platform is going to have issues, right? I mean, Microsoft Word has been around for decades and it still has issues. So I'm not worried about if it has issues. And the other way I do it is, and I have access to this, right? Like, so frankly, Francois, I'll reach out to Francois. I'll reach out to, iCapital Mirador. I'll reach out to Aaron Hulse at Deviate, and I'll basically triangulate the opinions there. And so the more people you could talk to that are in this space and that have better access to the information than you, the better off you'll be. And so I think that's part of the process too. Because you can't look at the platform and be like, this is great, because how does it actually work in practice, right? From service, functionality, cost, in pretty much all of the above. So that's how I go about it. And it's, maybe slightly unorthodox, but I think it's an okay process.
Yeah.
Maybe to add one on my side as well. The wealth management industry has always been a people's business, and many of the family offices really like to build up relations with their vendors. Now you're selecting a software which is tech only. So my advice is, if you go that path, make it very personal. Try to get from your vendor an owner of your onboarding project that is really day-to-day with you in contact, and where you can really build up as well a social bonding, which helps a lot. Because at the end of the day, if you select a family office software, if you do it right, you will be married for the rest of your life. It's quite difficult to switch from one vendor to the next. It might get easier in the future when data is getting more and more standardized, but at least now what I see out there from vendor architecture, it's very difficult to switch. So therefore, if you want to succeed in that project, in onboarding and getting it up and running, having all stakeholders using it in the right way, education is here a big topic. Go and try to get your one guy at the tech vendor that is 24/7 available for you and helps you to get through all the ups and downs that you will have in the onboarding process.
Yeah. And maybe a following question to that, which is thinking a little bit more about that implementation and sort of adoption piece, right? So, say you've selected the platform, you've now decided to implement it. What are some of the best sort of practices to getting everyone up to speed and getting the maximum sort of usage out of it? Martin, you obviously mentioned sort of educating the family as well. Are there other things that come to mind for you?
Education is one part, but the second part is as well, if you select the software, listen carefully to the vendor. In which process is it best to use the software? So if you have an established family office with established processes and you try to tweak somehow the software that it adapts to what you have done the last 20 years, you will definitely not get best out of that software. But if you try to have a little bit best practice of other clients of this tech vendor, how are they using it? And maybe even adjust a little bit the organizational structure of your family office or the job profiles of different employees using such a software, is definitely generating efficiency and long-term benefits. So I would say this is a very crucial point. Listen carefully and try not to reinvent the world if others have done it already and succeeded with a certain procedure.
Yeah, great. Well, with the plethora of options out there, there's obviously the nature for consolidation in the industry, right? And what that means is more private equity firms obviously are moving into this space. What does this mean for adopting solutions? Is this something to be concerned about, Francois, do you think? What are your views?
I guess, we're seeing the start of it, Kyle. We're seeing more private equity firms being interested, and I think it's just because of a lot of these firms, a lot of the vendors kind of reaching that stages of growth where they become interesting to these firms, right? So it's a newer kind of industry. There's definitely a lot of legacy players, but there is just that stage that we're reaching in terms of maturity in some shape or form. I think there are a lot of smaller players that could be interesting to go into roll-ups, for example, where we, again, going to what Mark said earlier, a lot of it happens first from the wealth management perspective. We've seen wealth managers being rolled up. In the US, there's a lot of RIA roll-ups into multifamily offices. And if we think about how private equity firms think about those strategies, this is a natural, like wealth tech could be a natural kind of follow-on. So at Simple, we're in conversation with many different PE firms to help them understand strategies around firms servicing wealth and wealth professionals and wealth owners. So broadly, this looks at wealth tech, multifamily offices. They're all kind of within those buckets. So, and then I think looking forward, again, the role of technology in terms of scaling these wealth firms and scaling the kind of service offerings, that's definitely a big piece. So yeah, I'd say we're at the beginning of these kind of roll-ups. There has been, a couple of transactions that's been interesting. It's been noteworthy. I guess, we'll probably see a lot more coming up. But there's definitely interest in that space.
Yep. Great. Well, perhaps a last sort of question for all of you, and it's a general question we always like to ask here at Simple. What excites you the most about sort of working in this space? And maybe Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I tend to focus on the people. So, having been in a family office for a very large family, having touching a lot of family offices today in my seat, kind of both North and South America, as well as, Asia, the Middle East. I like the people aspect of it. I kind of say being a family office executive is like a cultural anthropologist, because you're not, everybody from outside the family office realm always think it's like this, you're working in a hedge fund or a private equity fund and everything's like focused on maximizing returns to your shareholders. But guess what? Your shareholders have maximum flexibility to do what they want with their capital that they created. So it's always kind of been a unique environment in that regard, and how families kind of make decisions, and the prism and the philosophy and the values through which they do that, both on the investing, the business side, as well as really how they incorporate, that next gen, as well as how they advance their philanthropic initiatives. So that's kind of what excites me about it, is just the people side of things. Within the overall setting of like the wealth creation, the business, and so forth. So that's what excites me. Thank you.
Martin, over to you. What excites you most about working in this space?
Yeah, it goes in the same direction. I mean, at the end of the day, having a large amount of wealth is as well a burden. And if you're able with technology to make this burden a little bit easier, make life a little bit better, for these kind of setups, that's definitely a very interesting journey. And as Mark said, it's getting very personal as well. And the longer you're working with a family, the more their challenges, the problems in daily business, and the more you can help them by connecting the right dots and find the right tech support providers. It's a super interesting journey. But on the other side as well, being now in the industry since 2017, having serviced wealthy families for more than 25 years, I'm really excited as well to see from all the market participants about the advances. Where is this technology going to? Not only AI. In general, if you look at softwares out there 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and if you look at the new emerging ones coming out now, as well in aspect of democratization of family office services, make it this kind of technology cheaper. So you have maybe as well a client segment below 50 million who might look at such a software. It's super interesting, and we are only at the first steps in that regard. So user experience, leveraging data, and at the end of the day as well, providing better information and better investment decisions will definitely be an exciting story to follow in the future.
Excellent. And Francois, what excites you most about this industry?
I want to say a little bit of what Mark said and a little bit of what Martin said in this case, but I think, strategically looking at the space, it's people, process, technology, culture, if we think about the kind of broad organizational view. And I think that the opportunity with technology is really to focus more on the people aspects. So having solid technology into place that you can use to answer questions on demand, and this area is just kind of growing at the moment. And potentially doing, in the future, some agentic workflow that's just going to free up people and basically make people, provide people with access to better knowledge and insights, really. So I think that's going to free up that space so that people can play the people game and technology can do the heavy lifting in the background. And I think that, to me, is a very exciting space course, the industry is growing quite fast. That's also super interesting and exciting. And it's changing just as fast as well. So I think being on that forefront of the next generation of family offices and private wealth and helping shape that journey for me is incredibly exciting.
We're incredibly excited to see the next couple chapters. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mark Typczyk, Martin Stadler, Francois Bothe. Thank you for joining today's webinar on family office software and technology. If you'd like to learn more about family office technology, you can log in or sign up for a complimentary account to access Simple's comprehensive family office software and technology report. With your account, you can post free family office jobs, connect with the webinar guests directly today, and further explore a broad array of guides, tools, data, services across the Simple platform. Thank you as always, and see you for the next session.